delighted to say there are already questions coming in. Just to remind you, you can get your questions submitted and please attach your name to it. The first has come in already from the Eco Congregation Scotland group. It's coming in live, and the question is, how will you prioritise between transport developments and reducing Scotland's carbon footprint? Shirley Ann Somerville first.
Well, there are a number of projects which we do need to look at in different sectors of transport. There are certain sections of our road network that do need investment. They are either dangerous or in poor repair, and that's the way we do need to look at the road network. What needs to be done to improve it? Are there any missing links? So when it comes to road, that's what we need to prioritise. But there's also a massive amount that's going into public transport. The Glasgow-Edinburgh improvement works is just one example which takes in much more than its title suggests. It really does ensure that much of central Scotland has an electrified railway, billions of pounds worth of investment going into the railways, which will benefit communities and towns across Scotland, not just the connectivity to our two major cities.
All right,
so
thank you very much.
that's one example of how we can invest in public transport.
Okay, thank you. What about the Liberal Democrats? Which is the more important, reducing the footprint or going on with transport developments?
Well, I don't think it's as simple a choice as making a choice between the two. We really need to do both. The amount of carbon dioxide that we're creating through our transportation is a huge proportion of what we produce in the country as a whole. Now, there's two aspects to that. Obviously, we need to try to decarbonise the types of vehicles that we're using. We need far more electric vehicles. We need the Scottish Government to take a stance, and indeed the UK Government to take a stance on that, and to move towards using electric vehicles, but also putting in the infrastructure to allow many other people to do that as well. We need to be moving, the difficulties around electric vehicles really come to the fore when you start to look at larger vehicles and transportation, and it really doesn't work for that type of problem. We need to be getting much more of our freight onto rail as a way of moving away from that. High-speed rail, let's actually deal with the large number of flights that are done, which we don't need to do in this country. We get high-speed rail in, we get transport times between major centres in the north of England and Scotland to London down to 3 hours, then we really do have a major competitor towards what are very, very high carbon forms of transport.
All right, we'll leave
lots
it
of things
now.
we do.
Okay, Ian McGill for the Conservatives. What do you say on transport developments vis-a-vis reducing the carbon footprint? As the questioner asked, how will you prioritise between the two?
Yep, I'm going to be very similar in my answer to Mike here. Some of it is about giving people a reason to behave better. So one example is a high-speed rail link. So if a high-speed rail link is running from, say, Edinburgh to London, then what we have is a comparable time between Edinburgh and London on the train and on the plane. If we can do the high-speed rail and make it so that taking the train is a much more pleasant experience than it is going out to the airport, waiting around in the airport for an hour, flying down for an hour, then having to get another expensive train into the centre of London. If we can do the train for cheaper, that's encouraging people. So even if they're not buying into the climate change, they're making a positive decision because it's easier and better for themselves. Again, some of the things the Conservatives have been doing nationally, because when we're talking about transport, a lot of the things are national, such as flights. So what we've been doing is things like cancelling the third runway at Heathrow, and we're going to replace air passenger duty with a per flight duty, so that the taxation there is much more encouraging good behaviour, and encouraging people to take responsible decisions with their transport.
All right, Patrick Harvey from the Scottish Greens. How do you make your priority between transport developments and reducing the carbon footprint in the country?
Well, the way that transport spending is actually assessed bears no relationship to climate change or other environmental and social objectives. We decide on the costs and benefits of these massive infrastructure projects in a way as though climate change wasn't even happening. And that's why all of the other political parties have backed a massive road building programme. You know, I was elected when the M74 Northern Extension was just being promoted, and I campaigned against it. That was promoted by Labour, signed off by Tavish Scott as the Transport Minister at the time, and supported by the SNP and the Conservatives. And then you've got the Aberdeen Western Peripheral route, you've got the extra Forth Road Bridge. They're still building more capacity into the road network instead of demand reduction. They're still working on the assumption that feeding and fueling ever-growing transport demand is a social and economic good. I don't think that's true anymore. And as for high-speed rail, yes, it'll be a good thing if we can build it, but that's decades away. And if it's not going to be seen as an addition to transport links that we have on aviation, if it's going to be seen as an alternative, well, frankly, we can start squeezing domestic aviation right now if the political will was there, and I just don't think it's there from the other political parties.
All right, Sarah Boyack, how do you respond?
Well, we need to do what we can to give people across the country decent high-speed broadband access so that they can make a choice as to whether they always have to travel. Then we need to look at active travel, the day-to-day travel that all of us make. Most of our trips are actually less than 2 miles, so we should be doing much more in terms of investing in making cycling safer and more attractive, and active travel options. We should look to making our bus industry much more user-friendly and much higher quality. That's why we'd like to regulate buses to make sure that people have buses there when they need them. And we need to decarbonise our car transport. That is fundamental. We have 10 electric charging points in Scotland at the moment. We would have an ambition of going to 10,000. Now, before you think that's too radical and difficult, just think about how many of us had mobile phones 10 years ago, and think about the infrastructure to put in place to make mobile phones work. It's something we've got to do rapidly to make sure that we do break the link between roads being used exclusively for vehicles that are either diesel or petrol. We've got to change the kind of cars we have, and also do much more in terms of logistics, in terms of freight, to actually change the types of transport we have for getting our goods across the country. And that's why it's got to be a low carbon focus that's also about job creation. We've got to tie the two things together, and I think transport and giving people choices, either whether to travel or how they travel, is fundamental.
All right, thank you. We'll move on now to the next question, which has come in live from Juliet via Facebook, and she wants to know which parties will commit to funding for energy efficiency, especially for the fuel poor. Mike Crocker for the Liberal Democrats, what's your position on this?
Well, I think that Juliet has cut right to the core of the argument, to be frank. Energy efficiency has to be the #1 priority, and that's why the Scottish Liberal Democrats have done what Chris Huhne has promised south of the border in doing a Scottish Green Deal, investing £250 million in energy efficiency schemes to bring up our housing stock to a far better standard. What that will do is bring potentially the 770,000 homes in Scotland who are currently living in fuel poverty, but we will try to lift those out by cutting their bills and making it far better for them. If we look at studies that have been done, this is not rocket science, this has been done in a number of other places. University of Ulster did a study into this, looking at £1 invested into energy efficiency, and they actually found that they got 42 pence of that back actually in savings in the National Health Service alone. If we bring in all the other investments in the local economy and savings elsewhere, this pays for itself. This is a no-brainer.
All right, Shirley-Ann Somerville, where do you stand on making sure that energy efficiency is properly funded, especially for people who suffer from fuel poverty?
Well, it is one of the most important areas that we have to tackle, because we do have to reduce our demand for energy as a priority. One of the aspects of the Scottish Futures Fund that has been publicised by the SNP in the past week is looking at a warm homes fund to specifically look at that aspect of it. So that is something which will be hopefully a part of that, but it's not just about energy efficiency, whether that's cavity wall insulation or anything like that, but it's also making sure that we make best use of new technology. That might be small scale off-grid biomass, not the large monstrosity that's being proposed for down in Leith, but small off gas grid productions is very important. It's about making sure that we're using different technologies, whether it's heat pumps or so on. So there's a variety of different ways that we can not only insulate our homes better, but actually heat them in an entirely different way that's much better for the environment. So I think there's two prongs to that very important aspect.
Ian.